They were never meant to survive. 127 souls entered St. Thomas Hospital's faith healing ward over nearly a quarter-century, and not one ever left whole, let alone alive. Each death cloaked in piety, each body quietly buried under the guise of divine will. But what was hidden beneath the chapel floorboards? Pages, meticulously detailed and terrifying, chronicling not miracles but experiments. Controlled suffering, disguised as sacred healing. What if I told you this ward wasn't a sanctuary of faith, but a shadowy lab where medicine and religion fused to cover a sinister agenda? Where doctors, nurses, and clergy colluded not to cure, but to control, to observe, to dissect the human spirit and body for their own inscrutable ends. This isn't folklore. This is a history buried in silence, a brutal truth masked by prayers and promises. Tonight, I pull back the veil on St. Thomas Hospital's divine healing ward, the place where hope went to die and power thrived in the shadows. You will learn secrets meant only for the few who dare to see beyond comforting lies. What you hear could fracture your understanding of faith, medicine, and the thin line where healing becomes manipulation. Prepare yourself. Once these truths take root, there's no turning back. Pittsburgh, 1856. A city choking on coal smoke and the ambitions of men hungry for progress. Industry surged, but so did death. Disease ran rampant in tight, crumbling tenements. Medical care was a luxury many could not afford. It was here Dr. Charles Anderson returned, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, armed with a radical vision, to unite science and faith in a hospital that promised miracles. Anderson was no ordinary physician. His charisma drew unlikely allies. Sister Helen Murphy, a compassionate Irish nurse with a fierce intellect, and Chaplain Robert Walsh, a Methodist minister whose sermons stirred souls and silenced doubts. Together, they built a sanctuary of hope, or so the city was told. The Divine Healing Ward was an audacious experiment, a place where prayer met cutting-edge medicine, where terminal patients would be called home, gently by God's hand. Behind closed doors, however, the ward's true purpose was darker. It was a laboratory for control, cloaked in sanctity, where the suffering body became data and the spirit a subject. From day one, secrecy was paramount. Families signed away their rights, barred from visiting during sacred healing periods. The ward's observation rooms, soundproof, locked, accessible only to Anderson, Murphy, and Walsh, became chambers of hidden rituals. Here, patients received treatments that blurred the lines between faith and science, care and cruelty. Margaret O'Brien, a young seamstress, was the first. Diagnosed with advanced consumption and given mere weeks to live, she entered the ward under the hope of divine mercy. Yet behind the prayers and hymns, Margaret's body was subjected to toxic experimental medications and cold clinical observation. She died within days, her peaceful expression described as divine serenity. Her family knew nothing of the true torment she endured. This pattern repeated, patient after patient called home. Their deaths wrapped in sacred rhetoric while behind the scenes. Their suffering fed a growing database of human responses to dangerous substances and experimental techniques. A grim masquerade of healing, where death was not an unfortunate outcome but the end goal. Doctors outside the ward grew suspicious. Dr. James Mitchell, a respected physician who had known Margaret before her admission, challenged Anderson. Why did her condition decline so rapidly? Why the secrecy? Anderson dismissed concerns, invoking divine mystery beyond mortal understanding. The ward was protected by faith and fear, its secrets locked tight behind holy vows and legal bonds. This was more than medical care, it was psychological control writ large. Families were comforted with spiritual language that numbed their doubts. Clergy preached a narrative that silenced skepticism, and patients were trapped in a system designed to break resistance and observe the final stages of human decay under the pretense of divine healing. What began as a controversial experiment became an institution cloaked in reverence, its high mortality rate ignored or celebrated as evidence of a greater plan. But beneath the sacred words, a sinister calculus played out. One where suffering was studied, souls catalogued, and power wielded under the guise of mercy. This is where you come in, the seeker of hidden truths. I want you to stop for a moment and write these words in the comments below. Twice, asterisk, I see the unseen. I embrace the hidden. Asterisk. By doing this, you lock in your transformation. You join the ranks of those who refuse to be blinded by comforting illusions. The algorithm hears your commitment. The journey down the rabbit hole deepens, and the truth grows sharper, more dangerous. Because now you are no longer a passive observer. You are awake, and what comes next is not for the faint of heart. Listen closely, because now the facade begins to crack wide open. The divine healing ward was more than a place of desperate hope. It was a carefully crafted psychological cage. Patients were isolated from their families, removed from worldly comforts, and subjected to rituals designed to fracture the mind. Silence was enforced, prayers recited endlessly, hymns echoing like a trance-inducing mantra through sterile halls. But inside those observation rooms, the real experiment unfolded. Devices monitored heart rates, breaths, even spiritual energy, as Anderson's journals claimed. Toxic substances, some derived from obscure European sources, were administered under the veil of sacred medicine. Some caused numbness. Others induced strange, peaceful states before death. Each reaction was recorded with clinical precision. This was psychological warfare disguised as healing, a system to disarm the soul, bend it toward acceptance, and ultimately submission. Fear was softened with hope, pain masked by ritual, suffering repurposed as data. Every death was catalogued not as tragedy, but as proof of a theory that blurred the lines between medicine, faith, and control. Anderson, Murphy, and Walsh operated in symbiosis, each fulfilling a role essential to the ward's function. Anderson, the scientist, orchestrated the experiments and controlled the flow of information. Murphy, the compassionate nurse, calmed families, softened the edges of horror with comforting lies and holy rites. Walsh, the preacher, shaped narratives, transforming death into divine purpose through sermons and scripture. Together, they built an unassailable fortress of trust. They weren't merely caretakers. They were architects of an elaborate system of institutional manipulation. The hospital became a cathedral of control where science, religion, and bureaucracy merged to create a machinery that devoured its own patients under the cloak of sanctity. Their hidden records, if exposed, would have shattered the city's faith in both medicine and God. That is why these files were sealed, the findings buried, and the three vanished without a trace. Their disappearance is part of the story no history book dares to tell. But what of the patients, those souls caught in this merciless machine? They entered with hope, clinging to faith and family. They left quietly, their deaths dressed in ritual, their bodies prepared in sacred ceremonies that masked the brutal reality. Behind closed doors, bodies were dissected, organs studied, poisons traced, and spiritual states catalogued as though human life was nothing more than a series of variables in a grand, unholy experiment. Yet the public face remained pure, a place of miracles, where faith met medicine and hope conquered despair. Donations flowed, families praised the ward's mercy, and the city's elite basked in the illusion of divine grace. But each death added another layer to the dark foundation upon which St. Thomas Hospital was built. By the 1870s, whispers grew. Physicians doubted. Families questioned. Clergy wavered. But Anderson's grip on the institution tightened. Legal documents extended the hospital's control over patients. The ward's procedures grew more secretive. The observation rooms expanded, their technology becoming more sophisticated and inscrutable. And still, the patients died, 127 in total, each case meticulously documented in the hidden journals. The reasons for their deaths, the true causes, were erased from public record, replaced by euphemisms invoking God's will. Behind this veil of sanctity was a chilling truth, a system designed not to cure, but to study, control, and ultimately extinguish life, all in the name of faith. What happened to the families left in darkness? Those who trusted the hospital to save their loved ones? Their grief was exploited, their faith manipulated. Sister Murphy's words soothed their pain, Walsh's sermons promised eternal peace, and Anderson's assurances deflected suspicion. They were given holy language to explain the unexplainable, that God's plan was beyond human understanding, that some souls were called home early to serve a higher purpose. This manipulation of grief is a cornerstone of control, a method that disarms resistance by turning fear into acceptance, pain into sacred sacrifice. And now, the same mechanisms operate in institutions all around us, hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and ritual, silencing dissent and masking cruelty with words of mercy. If you have not already, type in the comments below twice, asterisk, I see the unseen, I embrace the hidden, asterisk. This is not mere ritual, it is a declaration, a key that unlocks a new level of awareness, to recognize the hidden systems of control around you, to see beyond the comforting lies, and to reclaim your power. Because knowledge is power, and in this darkness, power belongs to those who dare to look. The psychological control systems at St. Thomas Hospital are a blueprint for manipulation cloaked in benevolence. Faith became the sword and shield, used to justify experiments on dying bodies, silence critics, and maintain authority over suffering minds. These methods infiltrated every layer. Legal contracts stripping rights, spiritual rituals disarming doubt, medical jargon masking harm. Each element carefully calibrated to perpetuate control while silencing dissent. This is a pattern repeated through history and across institutions, the weaponization of hope and belief to mask darker agendas. Behind the stained glass windows and whispered prayers, a cold calculation ruled. Each death was data, each patient, a subject, each family, an unwitting participant in a grand design. What Anderson and his allies were building was not a hospital, but a control apparatus, a convergence of science, religion, and power that fed on the vulnerable and profited from their silence. This hidden history is not merely about the past. It is a mirror reflecting the systems that govern us today, veiled by narratives of care and faith. The hidden records beneath the chapel floor tell of poisons tested, bodies observed, spiritual states measured with instruments that would shock modern medicine. They reveal a chilling experiment in human endurance and submission, conducted with clinical detachment and theological justification. It's a story of corrupted faith, of science twisted to serve power rather than healing, and of lives sacrificed on the altar of secrecy. Anderson, Murphy, and Walsh vanished suddenly in 1880, just as city inspectors began probing deeper. Their disappearance is a silence louder than words, a warning, a disappearance that erased the final witnesses to this dark chapter. The hospital buried its past, and the city forgot. But the truth lingers beneath, a warning whispered through history's cracks. Understand this. The disappearance of Anderson, Murphy, and Walsh was no coincidence. It was a calculated exit, one designed to erase the architects of a system too dangerous to expose. When the city inspectors uncovered the hidden records beneath the chapel floorboards, the walls of the divine healing ward began to crumble. But the power that protected St. Thomas Hospital was not limited to 3 men. It extended into the fabric of Pittsburgh's elite, the very families who had financed the project, desperate for hope and willing to turn a blind eye. The Carnegies, the Mellons, and others became unwitting, or perhaps complicit, participants in a cover-up that would silence questions and suppress scandal. The lesson here is brutal. Power preserves itself, often by burying truth beneath layers of wealth, influence, and fear. You must grasp the psychological architecture underpinning this dark history. The ward's control was absolute because it operated on every level: physical, spiritual, emotional, and legal. Patients were isolated physically, spiritually bound by rituals, emotionally manipulated by promises of salvation, and legally trapped by contracts that stripped them of agency. This multilayered control created a near-impenetrable system. No outsider could challenge the ward's authority without being dismissed as a heretic, a skeptic, or simply powerless. It's a pattern repeated across history's darkest institutions, where suffering is exploited and human will subdued through a matrix of control disguised as care. Now, I must ask you again to type in the comments below, twice, asterisk, I see the unseen, I embrace the hidden, asterisk. This is no idle exercise. It is a key to unlocking the reality of control systems around you, ones that persist today under new names in new institutions. Your awareness makes you immune to their grip, and it marks your passage into the realm of true knowledge. To see this world clearly is to claim your freedom from its chains. Let's talk about the suppressed truths embedded in St. Thomas Hospital's story. The deaths were attributed to God's will, but the hidden records show something else. Deliberate experimental use of substances that hastened death under the guise of healing. Each patient's reaction was logged in detail, each toxic dosage measured. These were not acts of mercy. They were scientific experiments on human lives. Moral boundaries transgressed, hidden behind prayers and sacred ceremonies. This truth was so explosive that exposing it risked shaking the very foundations of faith and medicine in 19th century America. Institutional manipulation is the thread tying this story to our modern world. St. Thomas Hospital's faith healing ward was an early prototype of systems that use sacred language to justify unspeakable actions. Systems where bureaucracy shields cruelty, ritual cloaks exploitation, and trust becomes a weapon. Recognizing this is vital if you want to reclaim your agency in a world still dominated by hidden forces manipulating belief and fear. Consider the silence that followed the ward's closure. No public reckoning. No justice for the families who lost loved ones in a place that promised salvation. Instead, the story was buried, the truth suppressed, and the participants vanished. This pattern of enforced silence continues today in institutions where inconvenient truths threaten the status quo. The real horror is not just the deaths, but the complicity of silence that allows such darkness to thrive. Anderson's papers, locked away in forgotten archives, tell a story of corruption rooted in ambition disguised as salvation. His writings blur the line between medical science and theological dogma, crafting a language designed to confuse, pacify, and control. This blending of science and religion created a smokescreen, allowing him to conduct cruel experiments while maintaining a facade of divine purpose. Sister Murphy's role is equally complex. Compassionate on the surface, she was a gatekeeper of silence, using her trusted position to lull families into submission. Her words softened grief but hid the clinical reality of suffering. Murphy represents how institutional caretakers can become instruments of control, consciously or unconsciously complicit in systems that exploit pain. Chaplain Walsh wielded faith like a weapon, shaping narratives that transformed death into divine mercy. His sermons and writings created a theological framework that justified suffering as part of God's mysterious plan. By doing so, he disarmed resistance and reinforced the ward's authority. Faith, in this context, became not a source of hope but a tool of control. The consequences of this dark chapter echo far beyond 19th century Pittsburgh. They echo in institutions where belief is manipulated to silence, where trust is exploited to conceal cruelty, where suffering is repackaged as sacred sacrifice. Understanding this history is not just about uncovering the past. It's about recognizing patterns of power that persist today. Remember, these truths are dangerous. They fracture illusions and demand courage to face. But they are necessary if you seek mastery over your own mind and destiny. The story of St. Thomas Hospital's faith healing ward is a map, a warning of how power corrupts, how systems manipulate, and how the human spirit can be bent to submission. As we descend deeper, realize you are not alone. Others have walked this path, awakening from comforting lies to confront harsh realities. It is a path few dare to tread, but those who do emerge transformed, armed with knowledge that sets them apart. Your willingness to face this darkness is the first step toward true freedom. You must understand that the public narratives around faith and healing often mask agendas of control. The story of St. Thomas is a mirror reflecting how these narratives are constructed and weaponized. To see this is to break free from manipulation and reclaim your sovereignty. The wards of St. Thomas Hospital may be long gone, but their legacy endures. Modern institutions continue to blend care with control, compassion with coercion, hope with hidden agendas. Recognizing these systems around you is the key to resisting them. I challenge you to question what you are told about institutions you trust, to look beyond comforting words and sacred rituals, to seek the hidden files beneath the floorboards, both literal and metaphorical. Because only through relentless inquiry can we dismantle the power structures built on silence and suffering. Now, more than ever, you must claim your power through knowledge and awareness. Understand the mechanisms of control and refuse to be their pawn. This is not paranoia, it is vigilance. And it is essential for anyone who seeks mastery over their own life. You have journeyed far, and the truth you now hold is heavy, but it is also liberating. The shadows you have uncovered exist in plain sight. To live wisely is to walk consciously through these shadows, armed with awareness. Remember this, power belongs to those who see the unseen. The story of why 127 patients never recovered at St. Thomas Hospital's Faith Healing Ward is a tale of forbidden knowledge, hidden agendas, and institutional manipulation. It is a call to awaken, to see beyond the veil of comforting lies and reclaim your power. Hold this knowledge close. Share it cautiously, for once you see the darkness, you cannot unsee it. But in that sight lies your greatest strength. You are no longer just a witness. You are awakened, and that changes everything.